on this. So the teachings of the circle, and it's basically a hand, and then when I talk about it, I say this is who we are: your mother, your father, your grandma, your grandpa, and then that makes up who you are. And then, so that's the circle of who we are. And as Dinesh done, and that's what I was sharing with the when I go out there, I talk about that, how we're that's who we are. Yourself, your mom, your grandma, your mom, your father, your grandma, and grandpa. They're with you on your mother's side, and then your father's side the same way.
Yeah.
So I go around. That's why I went to the college and started talking to them about having how this healing process needs to begin for all these families that have been affected by that Carlisle. So that's all I wanted to share. So thank you for hearing me out. It was a challenge, but like I said, it's got to start somewhere. So yeah. I'm glad it's here. And then also being a part of the murdered and missing Indigenous women, there's stories of, there's one Navajo woman who was dismembered and her body parts were thrown off the bridge just right down the road where we deliver water to the community. And that has affected a lot of people because they found her in garbage bags, and that's sad. Every time we drive by there, I was say prayer, and we try to give tobacco, and think about all these people that are affected. Because my daughter got mixed up in all that by accident. So anyway, that's all I have to say. So thank you for hearing me.
You know what? Condolences on your loss, and I know that this is a result of the boarding schools. People can look back, the last couple of years, the last 10 years. I look all the way back. That's how far back I look, and I blame all this on that. And what you're saying about what you've been up to and how you've been, your healing journey that you're on. Our prophecies, the Anishinaabe prophecies of the 7 fires, it says that we must turn around and go back on the path and pick up the gifts that were left by our ancestors. And those gifts are the songs and the ceremony and the language and everything that we're missing to make us whole. And so the sooner we can get back on that path, the more we can save, the more lives we can save. Yeah. And what I was reminded when you were talking is that, a lot of people think the boarding school was just an era that it started and it stopped, but it hasn't. We still have the boarding schools. They have changed, they have flipped, but there's a lot of our people whose parents aren't doing well and they're not living their best life, and the children have to go to boarding school, like in your situation. But those boarding schools today are more conducive to the culture, towards the language, and I'm hoping more conducive to the history of the boarding schools themselves, because they haven't stopped. A lot of them are still going, and a lot of them are strong. A lot of them are doing really good things, So I just want to say I'm so sorry about what happened, and I still blame all this on what happened at the boarding schools.
I just wanted to say one last thing that I didn't really share. My college years in Michigan, I was with the Anishinaabe people, and they welcomed me into their lodge. And but during that time, I went to college, and I went to a residential school. It was a Baha'i residential school with the Baha'i faith. It's not really a religion; it's a faith. So I studied all their material, and then at the same time, I experienced a lot of. It was weird. The whole thing. The people that I felt closest to were like Mexican and people from Costa Rica and South America. I seemed like I was drawn to them, but then there was the Persians and then the American blacks, and then you had Ethiopian blacks that I were with. So there was 2 of us there, 2 Navajos. There used to be a Lakota there, but then the Lakota guy got in trouble, and they had to tell him to go home. But me not knowing that he was an alcoholic, and so when I was there as a student, they assumed that I was an alcoholic, and so when I got into a fight with the Ethiopians, um, I was the one that had to go to AA. I was the one that had to, but that other guy, they didn't send him, but they told me, and they said, if you don't go to AA, then you're gonna have to go home. And I said, okay, I'll go to AA. So I went to AA. They took me all the way there. I walked in the door, but they didn't. The people that brought me to AA, they left. And so as soon as they left, I walked out. I walked straight through the hallway, all the way out the door, and went to the restaurant and stayed there, had coffee. Then I got back in. So I had to do that for a whole month. So those are the types of situations that and then the hazing. There was hazing going on. I had to stand up for myself for having to do with the hazing with the college students against the American blacks and the Ethiopians. So I've experienced some racial stuff in college. So yeah, it's you're right. It's still going on. It's still going on. Residential schools, boarding school. I mean, day schools. They're still going on.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. In our next panelist, Delwyn Elkbeard Fiddler. He's an enrolled member of the Cheyenne Sioux Tribe, Sandark Band, a world-renowned Native American performance artist. Delwyn created Paza, Tree of Life, to fulfill his mother's dream of returning people to the knowledge and traditions of their culture. Delwyn is an advocate for all Native people and works with many tribal nations and governments and entities to solutions to improve the way of Native people across Turtle Island. As a child, Delwyn went to St. Joseph Indian School in Chamberlain, South Dakota. So you can tell us about your experience and what brought you here?
Thank you all for being here, my brothers and sisters. When I was young, most of my life, I've been kind of like taken care of or sheltered, I guess, if you will. I don't know why I was sheltered in such way. My first babysitter was a horse, and I was in the country with my grandparents and a relative singing, dancing. My father spoke about 15 different languages. He talked to me in Ojibwe, he talked to me in Chippewa, he talked to me, Crow. I mean, that's all these different type of languages, plus German. He knew these different languages, and he would sing those type of songs. And then one day, that's all I knew was the horse and country, and just being in that such way. And then all of a sudden, I guess I woke up, or I kind of went to, my parents told me that we're going to go eat somewhere, I don't know what this place was about. And they picked me up and it took me to St. Louis. And then when I got there, I was like, oh, great, I get the food. I was hungry, I wanted to eat some food. I finished my meal, went to use the bathroom to wash up, whatever, get ready to go. And then my parents are gone when I came back out. Parents and my brothers and sisters were gone. I didn't see my parents for the next maybe about 6-7 years. So I guess how you feel, I guess I didn't grow up with my parents in such a way, that way, like most people went through. I never seen a non-Native person, like an African American or non-Native, white man, as they say. I was totally in a very culture shock. To go to school, to go to church. I don't know what church was. I couldn't speak my language. I couldn't sing. I couldn't dance at that time. We as Native people just now got our rights back in 1989 officially, since the time of Little Bighorn. So a couple years later, in the early 90s, St. Joe's told everybody has to go home. I didn't know my parents, where they lived, or where, who was going to take me at the time. I ran into my brother. I didn't know my brother was there either. My other brother, Derek. I didn't know he was there. And I asked him, I said, who's your father? He's a that one. Who's your mother? Shirley. And he was talking about my same. I said, I got the same mother and father. I was like, hey, you're my brother. So it was like, wow, I never seen my, family. So um, it took a while for me to kind of transition from being native, I guess, if you will, to speaking English, from Lakota to English, and then do how they do, go to church and wake up, have a routine. Then when I left back into the rural world, I guess, if you're back to the city life or the reservation, I now again, culture didn't have 3 meals. Nobody wasn't there trying to give you 3 meals. You wasn't going to church. I learned very quickly you have to defend for yourself. You had to sing and dance. My other relatives were ceremonial people. My other side of the family were power people. The Fiddler family are well-known traditional dancers worldwide. They perform all over the world, and that's just what we do. Me and my relatives become in that such way in the arena still. I still do it. And then also ceremonial way, same thing when the nations call upon us. So things that happen there, I go to St. Joe's. Every time I go there, get close, I go there and say, this is my home. When I go to Carlisle, I say the same thing. Every place like that, Jim Thorpe, same thing. I'm home. I say I'm home. I go every military base in that such way that brings that ties because our relatives are buried there. They're still buried there. And the movie was very empowering, but it hit home. It really hit. And I'm also where it really is like, okay, I got to try to help my people out, somehow. So most of my life, I got into some trouble, and the judge came to me and said, well, go home and get educated on your reservation, or you're going to go to a boys' home in this way. And I was like, oh no, I already know what that kind of deal is. I do not want that to happen. So I decided to go back home to the reservation. And by doing that, I became a hoop dancer. I ran into Kevin Locke. I ran into Del Shifigo. And plus my relatives really started taking me to powwows. My other brother, Kenny, he was a world champion traditional dancer as well. I'm a grass dancer. And I took the arts up, I guess, if you will. Jackie Bird was kind of down there as well. She was in that, it was kind of an amazing time. I guess we all kind of like, from the grassroots in South Dakota and Minnesota area. I said, well, this is pretty cool. Jal Chifigo Jr. Also wanted to work with me at that time. Unfortunately, he got into a car wreck. And when I go to see my relatives again on both sides, they say, they tell me to have ceremony in that such way. I went to every nation to do so. This last year we hold a healing week. Now we did it for 2 years straight. We had a healing week. I took all these spirits and individuals that come back home to Midwest, to Black Hills, Paha Sapa, to bring these things. So we share these different sacred sites and bring that home. And early 90s, the government was there at my house. I couldn't figure out why they're there, why they're talking to my mom and dad and my family. Well, I come to find out that we are the original traditional family that keeps the nations together of the whole Midwest, what we call the Seche Chikanwi, but all the 34 nations, but also the extended families that Bad River, Red Cliff, all these nations within that general size scene with that Chanupa. You have that Chanupa, that's a tree of life. Wanka Paza, that's what that means. You go to the universities, you go to that community college there in LCO or different locations, those signals and those memories are still there. Those medicines are still there. They're still sharing that knowledge. So now, I travel all over the world for embassies and presidents, royal families. I got into acting. I came to Philadelphia for education and stuff. So now then one day my parent got a call from a person saying your mother and dad's in a hospital. You need to come back right now. So I need to go. So I said, okay. So I went back to the reservation, and that's when they asked me, "It's okay. You need to do something for your people. Tell the truth now from your heart. Tell the truth and bring healing to all the people." How we call the medicine well? Well, that comes from the great prophet, sweet medicine, and everybody uses that. And even so many lessons. So I talked to a lot of elders and people going to powwows, doing ceremonies, and now I'm to the place where I bring that bridge, I guess, for all nations. And I went to Bad River, I went to Wisconsin, I went to Chicago, Illinois. I mean, just all the way to West Coast, Canada, all the way back down. And I continue to do so right now where I'm at currently to bring that education and healing. So even there's some injustices within my own reservation right now. But again, it's not about that. It's about bringing healing back and that trauma, that 4 phases of conquest as they, overall. But there is a way, providing that healing back, and we have to come together just like how they did when they brought the relative back home, came to Carlisle to get that, and then went back. Carlisle used to have a powwow there, a big celebration there. These different things the nations come in, and now we came again to bring healing. So every chance I get, I pray. I go to Philadelphia, I pray. Everywhere I go, I pray and bring tobacco and trying to share that knowledge. So now I just want to share with everybody. Now I just want to, it's just not enough. I just want to share all these different healings ways to bring the people together in that such way. So this is what I do now. I'm still going through it myself. I with our historical trauma, but I'm doing best I can. And I can't even speak language, because every time I speak the language, it's like triggers my mind. It goes right. I get hit on my hands. I feel like and get hit on my hands. So I can't even. My relatives make fun of me because I can't speak Lakota. I fluent, or I'm like, well, I don't want to sit there and explain it, but I just tell them, I say, okay, how, put some tobacco down, because you never know what's happening with everybody individually, but same time, we're going through that struggle, we're going through that path. So it's just a good way to be kind. So yeah, I want to reach out to you guys in the future too. So to work in that such way with everything. So thank you. Wopala Tanka.
As we're talking there, and you were saying about having to go to church, and then how you flip that around and you're picking up your ancestors' gifts that they've been left. What I've noticed is that we have many of our older relatives and our contemporaries as well, like my mom. And she said, Mike, all I know is Jesus. She says, as she went to Bad River, she went to St. Mary's boarding school. And she says, all I know is Jesus. I don't know the big drum. I don't know the Meday Lodge. And she even wanted to go into the Sweat Lodge, but it never happened. And so those people, they're the ones who carry with them, what they learned in the boarding school. And sometimes they look at us as though we are still the savage and the heathen, and there's really no changing that mind. They have a mindset that's it's already ingrained. So yeah, it's something else.
Yeah, it's like I tell my friends over here, they're trying to do shamanism. They say shaman, I'm a medicine man, do all these ceremonies, hioka, all this stuff, right? And so that's kind of sad, because you're not native. And at the same time, I said the BIA is going to come after you. The FBI is going to come after you. Or these other nations that know about this, they're going to come after you. They think I'm playing around. I said, no, this is very serious, because we're not trying to hurt people. We're trying to bring healing, and throw that culture and your traditions, we as Native people, into your face in that way, disrespectful way, like you're saying. Again, we have to take that on, and take your feathers, and you gotta like smudge yourself and say a prayer and go again. Keep trying.
Absolutely.
So it's that's why the best way, I guess, I even asked Jim, we traveled to different places, and my brothers that came to South Dakota seen that, and it finally hit me when we went to Bear Butte. My energy just finally to explode. It just came out, and it wasn't pretty words that came out of my mouth. But now that I was over, I apologize, but again, I said, these kind of things needs to come in a harmonious way, because you're also thinking this is, you're playing with something or doing something that's not, you see that and you're like, okay, what can I do? You don't, you'll say, okay, how can I talk to the policy? So now I suggested that, for that 1 week this past year, I never seen that many agents, park rangers and agents to come see me just pray. They said never seen two more natives together to praying. I was like, wow, we're not harming nobody. We're just trying to pray together and heal, but yeah, it was good. So yeah, with that, I just want to say thank you, and that we continue on. So thank you, brother. Thank you.
Very good. And next we're going to go to Mayor Sean Schultz. He's elected to the Carlisle Borough Council in 2013. Sean earned his Juris Doctor at Penn State Dickinson School of Law and has been president of the Carlisle Firefighters Association since 2012. Sean currently serves as the chairperson of the council's Public Safety Committee and also serves as the co-chair of the Parks and Recreation Committee. And so, Sean, I understand you are part of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was started, and I'm just wondering what brought you to that. And I guess you retired the town crest. What did that involve, and what brought you into this project?
Yeah, so I sit as the liaison to our Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I can give a little bit of background on how that commission came about. And we haven't touched specifically on some of the details of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, but that just to give some folks some perspective who aren't aware exactly where that sits in relationship to where I am at this moment, is that the school was on the outskirts of the borough. It had been the Carlisle Barracks and military installation, and is now again, and is the site of the U.S. Army War College. But what brought us to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was really a reckoning more broadly with white supremacy and systemic racism locally here and throughout the country. At the same time, as the remains of those young children at the industrial school were being repatriated. So it was really an intersection of a number of things that in January 16th of 2021, we held a town hall on racial equity. And out of that town hall, we had a number of folks suggest that we create a Truth and Reconciliation on council. At that time, I was a member of council and deputy mayor. So we organized that town hall, have that recommendation for Truth and Reconciliation Commission on February 11th of 2021. Council passed a resolution creating the commission. And I do want to read specifically the acknowledgement that we very intentionally drafted into that resolution here. And that reads that the Carlisle Borough Council acknowledges that the land upon which the borough of Carlisle sits is the traditional and unceded territory of the Susquehannock and other indigenous people who stewarded the land for generations and were forcibly removed through physical violence, fraudulent purchases, and broken treaties. And so council recognized, and we have residents who brought and continue to bring these issues forward, that we have a great reckoning to do here in Carlisle. And I do want to thank Paul, although he couldn't be here, Wayne Delwyn, for sharing those gut-wrenching, difficult stories and grounding this tonight in those personal stories. And I can imagine the voices of those children who were lost to us so many years ago at the school echoing in your words tonight. So thank you very much for being here and sharing those words. Where we are with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission now, we gave them a very broad mandate and basically told the commission, we're a political body. You do your work. You make your recommendations to us, no matter how difficult the political consequences of that may be for us locally. So the mission of that Truth and Reconciliation Commission is to examine and document policies and practices and actions of the borough of Carlisle and how council over history has contributed to racial inequities and systemic racism. Still grounded additionally in the impact that we had locally on indigenous people who were here long before European settlers arrived in 1751. So how did I come to be here? I mean, that's a tough question. I sort of coming into this tonight wondered if I'm probably the least significant voice to be speaking here tonight, but it's like anything else. I mean, it's a life journey. As someone who I think from my childhood was taught to look out for those who are in need, are in pain, and to seek justice for those people. So over time, the need to put right what systemic racism has borne out in this country over the centuries, and to do our part locally. I and we on council believe that it was important that we put a commission together to truly do something. And our expectation is not that it's just going to be words, although words are going to be important to the healing process. That we expect to be able to take some action that's going to be meaningful, and although we're not going to change 400 plus years of racism overnight, we are going to make steps to heal. We are going to make steps toward, as I think, as Wayne, as you phrased, doing something that's more healing and more productive, and making reconnecting us and making us a better society and a better community, and more in touch with our land and the people who have inhabited it and continue to.
So when do you expect this report to be concluded?
They will be making their recommendations by the end of this year, and I could, if Olga doesn't beat me to it in a bit, there's more detail at carlislepa.org/TRC on the commission. So they are working through month by month, week by week, a number of issues, and they specifically outlined at their retreat a couple of weeks ago that they will be dedicating a meeting to indigenous policies that affected and the history of indigenous people in this area, and that'll be early in the fall.
Right, and in this Truth and Reconciliation, the reason we have to have it is because of the ignorance of the dominant society. I'm just wondering, when did you become aware And did you grow up knowing these atrocities happened? Or did just, like in college or even later?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember specifically when I would have first learned about it. Probably by high school, and I grew up in a couple hours away in the Philadelphia area. But I will say, and the importance of the film and what we're doing tonight is locally here in Carlisle, despite having that Carlisle Indian Industrial School and that history so near to us, I know there are folks who just continue to lack the knowledge of what was there. I mean, we've had people at public meetings say things like, well, Carlisle was very good to the Native Americans. And thinking that, oh, well, from a sort of a Eurocentric perspective, right, there was this school there and we created this opportunity for education, right? But completely ignorant of the reality that occurred there, and that we're going to be, I read a few weeks ago, disinterring and repatriating another 6 children from the graveyard there, and children still who remain unaccounted for. So there's truly I think that if there's a positive to sort of turn this back to turning that pain into a positive, right? These events are bringing that suffering and bringing that history to light in a way that I don't think it was brought to light in textbooks, or even just locally here in the local history of the residents here in Carlisle.
Do you see a connection between land back and the boarding schools and reconciliation? And would you be willing to work towards giving land back to the tribes there?
Yeah, so we have what I would say is we are open to, as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission works through its process, input on issues like that. A lot of sort of jurisdictionally where we are is separated from where the school is, and of course we're about 5 square miles of a borough here. So I'm not sure how that process would work exactly, but it's I'm sure sort of locally that's a discussion that would be important to have.
Yeah. Okay, Miigwech, thank you.
Sure.
And our next panelist, James Todd. He's an ordained United Methodist pastor from Eastern Pennsylvania. He currently serves as the chair of the human resources teams of the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference of United Methodist Church, and serves on the board of Lumina, an intercity mission serving the poor in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Jim has participated in services of repentance for acts of violence against Native American people in both regional and national gatherings of United Methodists. And he seeks ways to bring understanding, reconciliation, and healing. So, Jim, exactly how are you working to bring that understanding, reconciliation, and healing to
So I was invited by Delwyn, one of our panelists, to join Tree of Life on the advisory board. And I'll back up to 10 years ago when I was sitting in a national gathering. This was our general conference in late April, early May of 2012. So it was exactly 10 years ago. And there were 2,000 of us in the Tampa Convention Center in Florida. And our general conference, you need to understand, is the body that meets every 4 years, and it decides policy for our denomination for the next 4 years, and they're the only ones that are authorized to speak for our denomination. So it's a very important gathering. I was elected to go as a clergy delegate, And that Friday night in 2012, we were listening with rapt attention. Now, there were 2,000 people in the convention center, and you could have heard a pin drop. There was a Native American theology professor, Dr. George Tinker, telling the story that happened to more than 200 women, children, and elderly who were slaughtered at Sand Creek in Colorado on November the 29th, 1864. I had never heard this story before, and I just was, I guess you could say, blown away by it. Dr. Tinker is a member of the Osage Nation, and he had been invited to speak to us that Friday night to set the stage for something that, to my knowledge, had never been done before, which was a large act of repentance on the part of our denomination towards indigenous peoples. And so Dr. Tinker explained to us tonight in excruciating, painful detail what happened to that group of Cheyenne women, men, and children who had been promised safe haven by the U.S. government at Sand Creek. And I guess what really got me was that this attack was carried out with great enthusiasm by Colonel John Shivington, who was also the Reverend John Shivington. So he was not only an Army officer in the Union Army, but an ordained United Methodist pastor. And he was basically sent to this massacre by another Methodist who happened to be the governor of the Colorado Territory. It wasn't a state at that point, but John Evans was an active Methodist and the governor, and he ordered the attack. Colonel Shivington carried it out. After these 700 Army officers went and slaughtered these people at Sand Creek, they then mutilated the bodies, removed many organs from the people, and there was actually a parade through the streets of Denver holding up some of these organs to celebrate this horrible, senseless violence. And it's incredible to me that up until the beginning of this century, so just 20 some years ago, some of these organs then, the skin was taken and used to cover Bibles, and these Bibles were on display at our Methodist seminary in Denver, Iliff Theological School. I just remember sitting in my seat that night weeping, as did many others, hearing the story for the first time. And at the end of that night, we closed with a confession that contained these words: while some in the church protested its transgressions against indigenous people, the dominant pattern has been one whereby both in silence and in active support, the church has participated in the violation, the exploitation, and even the killing of indigenous people. Our congregations and ministries benefited from native lands acquired unjustly when it was not as a result of outright confiscation. At the end of the service that night, we were encouraged to go back and to pick up symbolic stones from the river of life that had been set up in the convention center that night, to take the stones back as a covenant to continue to listen and to walk the journey of healing with one another. Now, I've since lost track of where that stone is, but that commitment that I made that night is still certainly within me. And so that's why I was so, I jumped at the chance to join POSIT to learn more about this and other atrocities, and also to share these stories with other white people like myself who, for the most part, have no knowledge of these things that have happened. And it's not just the massacres at Sand Creek and Wounded Knee that we know next to nothing about as white folks, but also the boarding schools that were so numerous that even our own Methodist historians really have no idea how many were Methodist operated, but there were quite a few, and I'll get back to that in just a moment. But There is so much history to be uncovered and told. And as one person in the documentary that we saw said, I grew up in Carlisle and never heard this history. And I was glad to hear that Sean had heard it growing up. I myself had heard none of this. And I guess for Christians like myself, it's more than uncovering the stories and telling these stories to others, not for shock value, but that we might act when we hear these stories. Telling the stories is an excellent starting point, but Christians go on then to talk about confession and repentance, which is what we were doing that night in 2012, and this has to be a big part of our response. We confess our racism and our prejudice against indigenous peoples and others that we perceive different from ourselves, but repentance, this is the hard part, because repentance is ongoing. And I want to just read what Professor Tinker told the crowd that night 10 years ago. He said, "It's way too early to talk about reconciliation. It's like asking an abused spouse to live with the abuser without any change. Apologies don't do anything. Repentance," he said, "is not something done once. It's a way of life. We have to give up some of the things Americans hold dear and make sure all have genuinely equal access to the riches of this world." He said, "I respect the United Methodist Church for beginning this process because," he says, "it is fraught with danger, takes a great deal of courage, and it is difficult and complex." And I don't pretend to have a lot of courage in this, but I am, willing to be on this journey. So I could tell you more about what our United Methodist Church has done over the years. And there was, in 2016, after we did that act of repentance in 2012, there was a very long resolution that passed overwhelmingly at our conference that talked about all kinds of things, lifting up tribal sovereignty, education, representations of indigenous people on boards and agencies, leadership development, health and welfare, repatriation of objects and ancestral remains, which is what the whole story of the documentary was about, respect for religious freedom, concerns for missing and murdered indigenous women, and respecting sacred sites, as well as many other things. So we have already done some good work, I think, in that area. We used to have 5 Native United Methodist pastors. Now we have well more than 100, so that these pastors can be appointed to Native American churches, not putting a white person there, but Native Americans ministering to other Native Americans, which we think is so vitally important. We're not the only denomination doing this work. Recently, in late March, Pope Francis issued this statement. He said, "For the deplorable conduct of those members of the Catholic Church," this is speaking about the First Nations schools in Canada, he said, "I ask for God's forgiveness, and I want to say to you with all of my heart, I am very sorry, and I join my brothers, the Canadian bishops, in asking your pardon." Just 3 days ago, in my understanding, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who's the head of the Anglican Church in England, and also indirectly the head of the Episcopal Church here in the US, he was visiting Saskatchewan in Canada at the site of a First Nations school. And this is part of what he said. That bit of hell was built by the church and in the name of the church. For that terrible crime, sin, evil of deliberately, consciously, stupidly, because evil is always stupid, building hell and putting children into it and staffing it, I am more sorry than I could ever begin to express. This is both personally and in my role as the Archbishop of Canterbury. And then he went on to say, I am more sorry than I can say. I am ashamed. I am horrified. I ask myself, where does that come from, that evil? It has nothing at all to do with Jesus Christ. I thought that was a very powerful statement on his part. But I want to emphasize that Christian leaders are only beginning this process. We're nowhere near the end. And that reconciliation work that George Tinker talked about 10 years ago, that needs to happen at some point. But there still needs to be more acts of confession, of repentance, of owning up to the part that we played in these schools. And I'll stop there. You're on mute, Mike. I'm sorry.
It brings to mind the Doctrine of Discovery, Manifest Destiny, and you know, I was raised in the Catholic Church, and so when I think of thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not lie, thou shalt not steal, those are like the three big ones. And then you have elected officials putting their hand on that book, and they swear to the oath. And it's such an important book. I mean, we're in 2022, has directly to do with that book, you know. And so out of the three main religions, Christian won. That book, and they shoved it down the throats of those little big, and you weren't here, and it certainly didn't happen to me because I wasn't here. The animosity and the rub, it comes from the fact that y'all are still benefiting from what your ancestors did all those years ago, and me and my people are still suffering. And so when that repentance that you talk about, when that turns into reconciliation and it turns into land back, that's when the healing will be exponentially on our side. But it has to be getting that land back and getting those reparations is going to be healing. But I also believe that giving it back will be healing for those people as well, you know?
Yes.
And another thing is that America, when we talk about Hitler and this big monster, but these are the people he learned it from. You know, he learned it from Henry Sibley and Ramsey and Pratt. He used those same techniques over in what happened in Germany, you know? And so this is what we have to put the spotlight on, is the history. And I'm so glad that the church is involved in that, because we can't do it alone. We can't do it alone.
And just real quick, Mike, you mentioned Manifest Destiny and the Doctrine of Discovery, and all of those things were part of that much larger document from our General Conference in 2016, owning up to those and saying the church had a huge part in the development of these doctrines, and we need to renounce that and do everything that we can to fight against those doctrines in today's world. So thank you for mentioning those. They're very important. They really laid the groundwork. Yeah.
And we actually had a group here from the Twin Cities go to the Vatican to try to get them to, you know, disavow them and throw them out. You know, we don't need them anymore, and the damage that they have done.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah.
So, okay. Last but not least, Tamara St. John is an enrolled member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Sioux tribe of the Lake Traverse Reservation in South Dakota. She is a tribal archivist, curator, and collections, and works with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office on cultural preservation issues. Tamara was elected to the South Dakota State Legislature in 2018. She serves in the South Dakota House representing District 1. and completed her second term with the 2022 legislative session. She has been working on Native American Graves and Reparations Act issues, missing murdered Indian women, missing and murdered Indian people, domestic violence, and sexual trafficking of our people. So where are you, Tamara, involved in this whole thing? Because I know you've been doing quite a lot. And you were actually involved in the repatriating 2 boys, is that right?
We have not yet completed that repatriation, and that's kind of where I'm at in this. We worked closely with UFNA many years ago, I believe 2016, and we also worked with Rosebud. A lot of us that work in, and I work for a historic preservation office, we're very connected and we support each other. So, you know, what UFNA did, her and her team, as well as Rosebud, they really broke ground for a lot of tribes and tribes like us, so that we know, you know, we can easier accomplish the repatriation that we're hoping to do. And real quick, the 2 boys that we have there at Carlisle, and part of this journey is also sharing their stories. As a tribe, many times it's my mantra that we as a sovereign nation need to take control of our history, tell our own stories, and to define our narrative on these important issues, and to be proactive and put that out there so that all can learn from it. The story of the 2 boys that exist there now, Amos Lebron boys is the first child to have died there. So he has that unique, terrible distinction. He died after being at Carlisle only 20 days. At the time that he left this reservation, there were a total of 4 boys, 2 girls that left with him from Sisseton Wahpeton. And by 1881, all 4 boys had died. So in a real short period of time, we lost 4 amazing children. Amos being the first to die, apparently, according to record, he had died of an illness, but he was buried because of course that he, and the law assert that there should only be white people buried in that cemetery. So they had to disinter him. They removed him from there and put him into another location on campus where, once again, we do know there's researchers believe he had been moved an additional time, but at minimum, we know that he was moved, or cemetery was transferred. We are there, and with archaeologists and others bringing him up from the earth, we don't know for sure whether or not that's actually him, or, you know, we have no way. There are no guarantees, and this was a discussion that we've had with the Army. The importance of it is so big that, you know, I've worried about that for years now, about being able to identify our children. You know, one thing, the people that guide me remind me that this is also a spiritual return. So to keep that in mind when we come, you know, on issues like this. The other child that we are bringing home is Edward Upright. And Edward, since 2016, and I don't think we have enough time to get into all the details, but in 2016, I had started to research to find the families because it's required that we find the next of kin. And how do you find the next of kin to a child that had, of course, no children in 1879? And many of these children have no baptismal record. There's very little information. And with Edward, his last name was very distinct, but it was misspelled. And, it would be a name much like, let's say, Spotted Tail or Red Cloud, or, a name that can carry down generations. But how to identify, who he actually belongs to so that I can find them and have them sign the affidavit for his return? I wasn't able to do that. I wasn't able to find anything that would identify Edward. And up until about the time, shortly after Rosebud brought their children home, and I did join them, Russell Eaglebear with Rosebud had been in contact with me during the time that they had traveled there for the transfer ceremony. So we were very closely tracking all of this. And he and I had discussions on, really how determined we were to bring them home. And in 2016, the Rosebud Youth Council gave me what is a place setting, a chair for Amos, because along with their children, they cared about Amos. They cared about our boy. And at times in the course of the years that followed, different administration, different chairmen and others, they maybe didn't care as much about this issue as I guess me and my office did. So that chair has sat with me in the archives room or in my office here. And there were times when I was very discouraged, and I would talk to him and say, well, I guess you're my boy now. This is personal. If I were a mother and my child died like that, I would do everything in my power. And that is exactly what I'm going to do. And I made that promise to him as well as Edward. And for all of this to happen within a short period of time after Rosebud had accomplished their work with the children that they brought home. We were working here and getting our documents together, and one of our Akichita, or our Kit Fox, the Kit Fox, as a part of our traditional societies, we have our societies intact, such as the Buffalo Heart Women and the Kit Fox. The Kit Fox are our veterans, our Akichita, and they retrieve. They are the ones that will go and they bring those loved ones home. And then the women, the Buffalo Heart Women, they're the ones that take care of those relatives as we do whatever ceremonies are needing to be done. The Kit Fox, for some reason, one of them had taken an interest in this issue. And what he did was he took it to their meeting and said, we want to help. We'll look to find information to try to identify who these children are. There's also John Renville and George Walker. So within a matter of days, one of them came to me and said, we found him. And I just said, no, you didn't. And they said, yes, we did. They took me down to the Bureau of Indian Affairs office, which is just doors down from my office here. And they proceeded to show me what was a probate document. And it identified Wa'anata, and it said his child had died at Carlisle many, many years ago. Clearly, this was Edward. And when I flipped back to look, who are we talking about? Whose child is this? It turned out to be Wa'anata. And Wa'anata is a traditional leader for many generations in our oral history, our own history. He would be, I've told people with the Army and others, this is like if we were bringing home the child of Sirimbo. This is a historical figure to this. This is his son. And in talking, I'm trying to rush this, but the fact that each of these children are the children of leaders. And it was very apparent with these boys. John Renville was the other child that died, and his story is a whole story in itself. He was an amazing child, and one of the documents said that we often see these qualities of intelligence and character, but all of these things were especially pronounced in this boy. Our prayers are with his father, Gabriel Renville, as he takes his beautiful boy home. And his son was just this handsome young man. You can see him in the pictures at Carlisle. And then there's George Walker. And George Walker is the last one to die there. He's the last boy. And I can tell within his words and a letter that he wrote that was in one of our volumes of letters from the missionaries, that he, we talk about mental health today. He was obviously depressed. He was very lonesome. All of his, his peers had died, and he wanted to come home. And so he wrote this letter, and the part of it that was translated to me, he basically says that, nobody has written since I've been here. Tell you about it, when I get home. They talked him into staying on there a little bit longer. And then the next letter immediately says, you need to come and get him. It's affecting his health. He comes home here and he dies here on this reservation. And when I told this story to an elder here, somebody who says prayers and helps us, with the spiritual aspect of ceremony and things. When he listened to the entire story of each of the boys, and, I really give that to him, because as a researcher, I sit with, by myself a lot of the time, but sat there and document just George. He could feel, and I feel it just from reading what I've read. And he kind of put his hand up and he said, I can feel it, he said. And he was kind of choked up. And he said, when you bring them home, he said, you bring them like chiefs that they are, and wrap them in a book, you honor them. That they would have been our leaders. They would have been that next generation of amazing leaders. So we really did lose a lot. And this is just our tribe. I see names like American Horse, Spotted Tail, when you get the other tribes. And the same thing is true with Yukna and their people. This loss of those generations, without getting into, it's the reason why the children of leaders were taken there. I saw newspapers that talked about the boys or the children there. One said the chiefs are here in Washington, D.C., and as a condition to will be allowed to see their children. So, used as a tool to get them to come and one document I read said they chose the children of the Sioux because the Sioux were most resistant to treaty. And when you consider what happened with Little Bighorn, there's definite reasons there for that. So that's just a little bit, I think, about, our goals with bringing these boys home. And I believe we are on track, and I'm hoping that we can still be on the schedule. We haven't received notice yet that we are actually on the schedule, but we are trying to be prepared for that. So.
Yeah. You were saying that he came home to die. He was sick. And we don't know because a lot of times when those children got sick, that's when they hurried up and sent them home because it reduced the numbers at the school of the deaths because by then you send them home sick and they die at home. So those numbers are mirrored. And you were talking about, you brought the chair into the room, and then their system and their rules, and they needed so much proof because now these are the same people, the same organizations who created this. They're the ones saying this is what you need in order to take, repatriate. So recently, Deb Holland introduced a federal Indian boarding school initiative. And so how does that ease those restrictions or those the bureaucracy, or hasn't it come to that point yet where they've come to a system of making this easier? Because when all this hit me is when I first heard the number 215 from up in Canada at the boarding schools. We all remember 215. Now it's up over 10,000. So yeah, do you expect the Federal American Indian Boarding School Initiative to ease the way you guys are not just
I
people,
don't
but
know that.
artifacts?
I don't know that it is going to impact the current work that we're doing. I will say that this is just one boarding school. Here in South Dakota, of course, we have Pierre Indian School, we have Flandreau Indian School, we have Wahpeton Indian School, North Dakota, as well as other schools that are, people literally forgot about them. A few years back, I was a part of an effort to put a marker at a Catholic boarding school in the middle of a remote area of Minnesota for 6 girls, Sioux, that were buried there and had been forgotten about. So the issue as I see it, and we do get contacted for things like ground penetrating radar or LIDAR work, all of the different technologies to identify unmarked graves, etc. And that work is very difficult, it's very costly, and many of the offices that are somewhat tasked with that, like my office, we receive $56,000 annually, which isn't even enough to pay for a person with the credentials to meet the secretary's standards to be able to be a THPO officer. So the idea that, how do we do this work? And it's my hope that within this, there will be funds made available to do these things. I was a part of the listening sessions on this. We have issues related to research, having access to documents. And I am a huge advocate for Native people doing their own research in many, many different situations. I'll give an example of Whitestone Hill, the massacre at Whitestone Hill. The same documents that the State Historical Society would use, I could use and show and prove that this was a massacre. So it's really, I think, for us to be proactive and do that. Fortunately, I have found great partnerships within Carlisle and the community. And obviously that's shown by having the mayor here with us too, that have provided access to documents and have really assisted. That unfortunately is not the story or the situation with others. So I think that, that's a big part of it. And I'm hoping that, this initiative will help with that.
So Olga, so now it's on to do we have any questions that people were asking?
We do have one question in our Q&A chat, and someone is asking, and besides this question, we also have several thank you messages from people, and I hope you can all see them. And I just wanted to thank all of the panelists for your time today and sharing deeply personal stories and with compassion and so much hope for healing. The one question that we have right here is someone asking, how do allies can demonstrate their allyship without causing more harm? So if anyone wants to answer that for our audience, that would be great.
They want to mind quickly by each individual learning more. Even the times I think it's a legislature and the issue that we have the data surrounding the social ills, but they never look at why or how we got that way. And I remind anybody that comes and hears the entire story of whatever it might be, that, you know, what you're witnessing is our recovery. We are in recovery. What you see and the things that we struggle with are a result of devastation of what was done to us. It is not because we're not capable. It's not because we don't want to work or that we are. It is because of what happened to us. So those that become knowledgeable in this issue, I think are, you know, instantly an amazing ally and help out there.
Thank you so much. In the chat window, I shared everyone's contact information. Tamara, I did not share yours because I didn't have permission, but we would love to stay
Absolutely
in the loop of your work and the efforts as they develop. So if there's anything that you think would be relevant to share there in the chat, please feel free. And I would again like to thank all of you, and big thank you to Caldera Productions again for letting us watch the movie. The movie link will stay active until the end of the week. It's in the emails that everyone received, so please feel free to go back to that email and access the link. And if you'd like to learn more about the movie or about Caldera Productions' efforts with the future movies, please feel free to visit their site. And also the movie site, which is homefromschoolfilm.com, and learn more about it and how you can watch and share it with others. So thank you very much for your time and for all of the great work that you're all doing. Have a good evening.
Thank
Thank
I
you.
just
you.
want to say thank you. Thank you, all of you, for participating. And you guys are all my relatives. That's what we need to establish. All my relation, that kinship bond.
Yes.
That's how I look at it. So thank you.
Yes, we're all related.
Thank you.
Miigwech. I appreciate everybody who showed up, and I'm sure we'll talk again.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh, Chi Gwitch.